Hi all, welcome to Parker's Reefs. On today's episode of the idiot-proof reef tank, we're going to put some sand, otherwise known as substrate, into this water box. Alright, so I guess I've kind of let the cat out of the bag a little bit and given away that I want to put sand in this tank. And there's a few reasons for that. I guess I understand that if you go sand free, it can be a little bit easier to maintain because it's much easier to keep the detritus out of the tank. But this is also a tank that's aimed at getting new people into reefing, and one of the first things people think of when they're thinking of a reef tank is beautiful crisp white sand and some sort of rock structure with some corals growing on it. So I wanted to steer clear of just having a glass box if possible, so I've decided to go for some sand. Now, we have to remember that we've got a few criteria that we're trying to adhere to. We're trying to keep things as easy as possible. We're trying to keep things as attractive as to beginners, trying to keep it reasonably affordable. Like I said, not the cheapest, but we're not just buying the most expensive things out there. And ideally, we want it to be attractive to the newcomer, and that's hence why I've decided to go with sand, keep it attractive. But it does leave a bit of a question as to what sand, because there's quite a lot on the market. Whether you go a real fine sand, a more coarse rock type, whether you go something that's already got some bacteria in it, whether you go a black sand, a white sand, a sand with coloured flakes in it, whatever it may be. I'll let you know what sand I've picked in a second, but before I go to that, I'll let you know the criteria that I've chosen this sand with, and hopefully that'll help people make their own decisions as to what sand they should go for. I've chosen a sand, one, because I wanted sand in this tank to look as natural as possible. I've chosen a sand that is fairly fine because it's going to be a soft coral tank. We're not going to be having a huge amount of flow in here. In fact, I'm still on the fence whether we're even going to have a flow pump in this tank at all. So we're not going to need that real coarse rock-like sand that's not going to blow away when you turn up a flow pump and turn your tank into a sandstorm. So I find if you're in a low flow tank, a real fine sand looks really attractive. And it's also great for some of those critters like some snails to burrow down in, and really that's stuff that advanced reef keepers kind of take for granted, but for new beginners there is almost nothing more exciting than feeding your tank and watching all of these zombie snails come up out of the sand to come and clean it up. So I've deliberately gone a very fine sand, and probably one of the most important criteria is that I chose this particular sand from is that it's not taken from natural beaches. It is a completely man-made sand, so it has no impact on our beaches or oceans, and that was really the tipping point for this sand that I chose. One other criteria that made me select this sand is it's ultra white. It is as reflective as you get, and as we know, we touched on earlier that we've gone the Kessel 880, which is not the most powerful light known to man. It's fairly underpowered, which deliberately we chose to make sure people cannot burn corals. But with the ultra white sand, it's going to reflect a bit of that light, and it's just going to help get all we can out of this light. So without further ado, let me introduce the sand I've chosen. All right, here it is, Aquarium Systems Paleo Sand. Now this sand comes in a fine and a medium grain. This one is the fine grain, so I've gone the smaller substrate. Once again, because we're not going to have a huge amount of flow, so we don't need the bigger granules to make sure they don't blow around. The fine sand will look really good. This is a 5 kilo pack, which from my absolutely loose estimates, looks like it'll be a perfect amount of sand. So it comes with the right amount of sand. It's ultra white. And as the packaging tells us, I'll read you the complete blurb from the packaging. Ultra pure natural aragonite from fossil origin is a substrate for saltwater aquaria. Due to its purity, paleo sand is extremely bright with high reflective properties, which is an advantage for highlight thriving corals. Paleo sand is an outstanding alternative to natural coral sand and protects the environment. Before placing in the aquarium, rinse the substrate thoroughly. So we'll do that in a second. But that's why I chose this sand. Full disclosure, it is not the cheapest on the market. It's not the most expensive because, as you can see, it's a dry sand. It doesn't come loaded with bacteria. We'll get to bacteria in another episode. But I really like the fact that it's dry, that it's man-made. It's not taken from beaches, which is a good point for beginners out there. In most states, in most territories around the world, it is illegal to go to your beach and take sand. That being said, you also, even if it is legal, you probably wouldn't want to anyway, because normally sand at beaches is quite fine. Well, it is down here in Australia. It's very fine, almost like a powder. You don't know what's in that sand. It can be quite pollutant, heavy. It's just like rolling the dice a little bit. Plus, like I said, in most areas it's illegal, so we don't really want to end up in jail for setting up a reef tank. So whilst this might not be the cheapest sand under the sun, it's completely sustainable. It's not taken from our oceans, it's man-made. It's nice and bright, it's clean. It's going to give our tank a really nice look. So let's get into giving this substrate a rinse and getting it in the tank. All right, so now we've got our sand. We're going to give it a good clean. We got a nice bucket here. This happens to be an aquarium system salt bucket, which is quite serendipitous, but realistically you can wash this in any sort of bucket here. Ideally, you probably want to wash it with some salt water, but I understand if you're brand new to reefing and you possibly don't have a reef bucket, or you may not even have salt water yet. People may question this, but you can do it in tap water. I'd probably rather wash it in RO or in salt water, and for the sake of a couple of bucks worth of salt water, I'd recommend it, and that's what I'm going to do. But if you get caught out, you can use tap water. It'll be fine. All right, so let's get this open. We nearly got sand everywhere. All right, so you can see just by tipping it out, there's a lot of dust in there. And that's exactly the dust that we don't want to end up in our tank. So that's why we're going to give this a good rinse. I'll give it some RO and some salt water. We're going to get rid of all of that dust and get it just down to our sand, and then we can tip it here in our tank. Then we can move on to the next episode. All right, so we're out here in my shed where I keep all my RO water, my artificial salt water, and my natural salt water for whatever I'm using. We've got our bucket of sand here, and I'm just going to open up the tap and get some RO water on this sand. Almost makes you want to make a sandcastle. All right, I'm just going to put a little bit of water in there just to get it started, because what I want to show you is, remember that dust that we talked about when we poured it into the tank? You can see that that dust has already formed this, this milky water, and that's the sort of stuff we want to get out. So I'm just going to give that a bit of a rinse. Could get my hands in there if I wasn't such a pretty boy, but I'm just going to go tip this milky water out, and we'll do it again. We'll just repeat until the water starts staying clear. All right, I got my bucket of sand with that milky water. I'm just going to give it a bit of a twist just to get the rest of that dust, well, get that, a bit more of that dust in the water. And you'll see by the water that comes out, it's pretty full of dust. And if we were to put that straight into the aquarium, that would take a fair while to clear out. You see my dog's a good help here. She likes to keep an eye out for the bugs and stuff. But you see we've still got a fair bit of that sandy dust in that water. Still pretty cloudy, but I'll go get some more water in here, and we'll just repeat that process till that water clears up.
So you can see I repeat the process here a few times. Don't be shy. The more time you spend cleaning the sand now, the cleaner your tank's going to be down the track. So give it a few rinses and all will be good.
All right, we're probably getting towards the end of washing this sand now. You can kind of tell by the water there that still got a little bit of dust in there, but to be honest, I've lost count of the number of buckets of water I've put through this sand now, and each time it gets clearer and clearer, but we sort of get to the point now where I feel like if I stir the sand up more, all I'm really doing is getting the granules to rub against each other, produce more dust, and then obviously a little bit of dust in the water makes it quite white. But you can see that water there now, you can actually see the sand through it, whereas opposed before, in fact, you can still see some of the residue of the original water up there, which just left a white stain, and that's particularly the type of thing we're trying to get out of the aquarium, because it can't be good. It's dust, and it's going to fill up your filter sock and any other sort of filtration devices you've got in your tank. So the more of it we can get out now, the better. Seems strange that you would spend so much time and effort in cleaning the sand. I realize at this point in the process, you just want to dump that sand in there, get water in the tank, and drop a fish in there. But it's the steps like this that if you just pay a little bit of attention and give it a little bit of detail, you're going to get a much better result. So I'm going to keep washing this sand. This will probably be my last bucket. I'll give it a bit of a stir in there. Just make sure I get all of the remaining residue in the water, and you'll see the water will still come out fairly white, but it was almost like white paint on that first bucket. So this water's starting to get a fair bit clearer. I'm going to be happy with that, because my back's starting to sing, and I want this sand to be clean as possible, but it doesn't need to be like, I don't know, I guess pharmaceutical grade sand. I don't know if any pharmacies use sand, but in my opinion, that's clear enough. it's time to dump it in the tank. All right, so we're at the point where we're going to put the sand in the aquarium. One thing you can do if your tank's been out of the box for a while, you could give it a quick vacuum. You could wipe it down to remove any dust or anything that's built up in there. This tank's been kept in the box. It's got a couple of bits and pieces. I gave it a little wipe down before, but you don't want to get too pedantic on this stuff. I'm just going to pop the light off to give us better access to tip this sand in. And let's tip it in. Now, that's not all of the sand. One thing to be mindful of, just because you paid good money for that sand, you don't need to use it all. Let's just space that out and see how much that is. On a tank like this, we probably want maybe 2 to 3 centimeters of, probably closer to 2 centimeters of sand all the way around. Let's have a look and see how much that is. Yeah, it's probably on the high side, to be honest. I could probably take some of that, although it's actually a little bit higher at the front than it is at the rest of the tank. I'm just using my hand to get it relatively level. There's no exact science to that, but let's have a look at that sand level now. Yeah, that looks pretty natural. To be honest, I could probably take a little bit of it out, but I'm going to roll with that for now, and we'll see how that goes once we put some rock work in there, because yes, we will be putting rock work in there. A reef tank's not much fun when it's just sand and water. We've got to have some sort of structure in there, so we'll cover that in another episode. What I probably need to do now is work out where I'm going to put this tank before I go putting rock, water, or anything else in there, because as soon as water goes in this tank, it's going to get really heavy. So I dare say my next episode will be where I'm going to put this tank, and because it's, I don't know, it's tank number 7 in my house, and in full disclosure, it probably is a temporary tank, but I've said that about 3 of my other tanks as well. So I need to find somewhere where it's going to be easy to maintain, easy access, good access to power, not in the way of the household activities, but also in a spot where I can actually watch it and enjoy it. So I've got to find somewhere to put it. The other thing to note is I've got this tank without a cabinet, hence why it's sitting on this filing cabinet now. That could end up being the cabinet, we'll see. A filing cabinet's not a bad option, but we'll work it out. I just need to have a chat to my wife, and we'll go from there. But till next time, guys, thanks for watching. I haven't gone through any of the comments of this video. I know I said I would, but that's probably because this episode sort of almost came out of thin air a little bit, because I didn't think I was going to do an episode on sand, because I didn't think there was that much content to it. But then when I started looking at picking a sand, I realized that it can be a daunting thing for a new beginner to the reef keeping hobby. There's all sorts of questions around sand, and like I said, I remember back to when 7-8 years ago now, when I first got into the hobby, and I went to the aquarium shop and I saw how much sand was, and I'm like, you're kidding, right? I'm just taking a bucket to the beach. So I think it's important to point out why. 1, that's illegal, and 2, why it's not a bad idea anyway. Sorry, it is a bad idea, don't mind me. Why it is a bad idea, and also why it's illegal. And also just pointing out some of the differences between the sand out there. So like I mentioned, you can get some that come with bacteria already, which just helps your cycle. Personally, I like things to take their time in the cycle. I recognize that's a difficult part for new beginners in the hobby, but it's a really good time just to take a deep breath and slow down and let the tank do its thing. I really wanted to go for a sand that didn't impact the environment too much, because we can't just keep taking sand from the oceans. So this man-made sand is a great alternative. It's super white. It gives really good reflection of the light to the corals, and it's a nice size grain. It's not too thick that it looks more like a pebble, and it's not too fine that it's going to blow around the tank. So they're the sort of things you want to keep in mind. The packaging was the right size at 5 kilos. We used almost all of it. There's probably still 2 handfuls worth in that bucket there. I could tip it all in, but it'd just be unnecessary sand, so I'll just keep that aside. And like I said, I could probably take a handful or 2 of this back out, keep a bit of sand for a nano, maybe something down the track. And of course, the final part is grab a sand, whichever sand your local fish shop carries. You don't want to pick a sand that you have to order online that's going to be shipped to you. Buying things like sand online doesn't make sense to me. Realistically, you're better off going to your local fish shop, having a chat to the store owner there or the staff, asking what sand they recommend, what sand they've got in their tank, so you can have a look at it and see how light it is, how much it flows around, or how clean it stays, and go from there. This paleo sand worked out well for me, but by all means, it's not the only option. It's just the option I chose. So until next time, guys, thanks for watching. I hope you don't mind that I skipped the part about reviewing questions from another time, because like I said, this was kind of a in-between episode where I was going to do sand and rock together, but I realized they were just a little bit too much content to cover in one video. Until next time, I hope you've enjoyed the series, and if you are, give it a thumbs up, subscribe so you don't miss any future videos, and if you've got any questions, pop them in the comment section down below. But till next time, guys, thanks for watching, and keep reefing. Cheers. Bye.